Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another Convo with Doug. I'm your host, Doug Owens. What can happen if your client decides not to get their property surveyed? Well, in this episode, we're going to continue our conversation with Patty Aiken of Exacta Surveyors. And she's going to give us 6 real-world examples of what can go wrong if your client decides not to get their property surveyed. And how one client even saved $50,000. All thanks to getting that survey. Are you ready? Let's go.
So the three most common encroachments: driveways, sheds, and fences.
Okay.
But there's also other ones, like people build gardens on their neighbors' properties, trees, pools.
So this is actually pretty interesting to me because my neighbor has solar panels in their yard. They're not on top of the roof. And I did not know where the survey line was because I told you I couldn't find that other one. So I wasn't exactly sure where it is. I remember cutting my lawn and I'm cutting right up next to the solar panels. And finally he came to me and he says, "You don't have to cut that. That's actually our property because there's a 15-foot setback for the solar panels." So I was cutting 15 feet of my yard that I really didn't have to because there was no line or anything there. But this picture here really gets me. That red line, are you trying to tell me that they actually built part of this house on the neighbor's yard?
This was an addition. This part was the addition. And this fence, somebody didn't get a permit for, because permitting departments want a house location drawing to make sure that you're not going on your neighbor's property. So all this, this is the neighbor's property.
Oh man, there's so much here. I mean, we could just unpack and talk about this all day long because there's a permitting process that should go through anytime there's a fence put up. That should happen. And it just happens all the time that people don't get permits, and not just for fences, but for many things in houses. But this is an example where a permit is very critical that it's done because you could actually put a fence up on the wrong property. Again, another reason to have a survey so that you know exactly where your property lines are, so that you actually don't build a carport like this or an overhang or whatever this is on somebody else's property, because this becomes a problem, because that's when it goes to title and it goes to legal, and it could be a whole bunch of other headaches associated with this. This really paints a vivid picture for any agents out there of whether they should or shouldn't get a survey.
Kind of scary. It's very scary.
Totally scary. So what happens in a case like this? What happens?
It depends on your neighbor. Some people will sell this portion, and they go through to redo the legal description. That can happen, and that has happened.
Wow. And that's assuming that you got somebody that's willing to work with you. If they're not, they can just basically go to legal avenues to try to get their property back. And that could be a huge claim on your part. So if you want to avoid these Hatfield and McCoy situations, let's get the survey going so that we know what we're getting. So what your buyer is going to get, and so that your sellers aren't in any trouble for anything that they've done.
Correct. So a lot of people don't know, you get exceptions to the title policy if you don't get a house location drawing. What does that mean? That means that they're going to write off the survey part if you don't get a house location drawing before settlement. They're not going to cover you if there's encroachments over the property line, adverse possession, errors in the acreage, undocumented driveways over the property, or any of those issues that title insurance would cover you if they found these things.
Okay. So what you're trying to tell me is that you could actually pay extra for the enhanced title insurance from the title company or from whoever's issuing title insurance. And then if you did not get the survey, there could actually be an exception where the enhanced wouldn't pay.
Yes, because, the title company is not going to insure something they don't see.
Right.
That's a risk for them.
Oh, it's a risk. So therefore, if there's an encroachment, like the picture with the line in the house, and it was there, you did not get that, you might not get paid from your title claim, and the new buyer might be liable for that.
Exactly.
Wow. There's a lot of reasons that we're trying to get people to see the value in getting title insurance at all, or if they're just going to go for the enhanced and get the, the better coverage, and then to find out that that might not even work if you don't get the survey.
Title insurance is a one-time thing. It's cheaper than car insurance. When you get owner's title policy, when you buy a house, that is good for as long as you or your heirs own the property. Don't ever not get owner's title insurance.
Okay. You heard that from Patty. So if you think that is, we just got to explain the value to it. Customers aren't going to get it, and they just might opt to not get it. At least if they want to make that decision, that's fine. But as an agent, I think it's our duty is to let them know the value, what they're going to get for their money, and let them make their own decision whether they get it. But I think I'm with Patty. I would agree that in most cases, that's what you want to do, is get some title insurance.
There's utility easements, are the most common type of easements on private property. It allows the utility company to come in if there's drainage problem, repairing utility lines or things like that. There's a utility easement that you can't really do anything with.
Okay, so they do appear on your location drawing, so you'll know what those easements are exactly. But the only, remember, if you are on private well and septic, those things will not be there unless you provide that information to the surveyors themselves.
Correct.
Got it.
This is an interesting story from a real estate agent who was buying her own house. She found out half of the pool and the entire pool house was built on a utility easement.
Wait, built on
what?
On a utility easement.
So what that means is somebody didn't get a permit for the pool, and it actually is a title claim for over $100,000 because it devalues her house.
Again, this speaks to title, and this is why I'm happy that Patty has this title background, because she can just totally speak to this. $100,000 title claim is a big deal. We do have a podcast here coming up on title that will talk about all the different processes and all the things associated with title and why you should get title or shouldn't get title insurance. And this is a perfect example of it, because you just never know what can happen with a property, something that just uncovered or undiscovered at the time of closing.
And the problem is, if the utility company has to come in and do any repairs, they can tear up everything.
Wow, that's like they almost have eminent domain to go in and just do it, just because they actually have the easement already in place.
So actually, this is another real estate agent's house story in Potomac. And this real estate agent was at the settlement table, and the listing agent said to her, "Oh, by the way, there's a 50-foot conservation easement in your backyard."
Okay.
What does that mean? That means conservation easements, you can't really cut, you can't plant trees, you can't put a garden, you can't do anything with a conservation easement. So they stopped the settlement.
Wow, just because of a conservation easement. That's actually an interesting topic, because that comes up in contracts all the time. But that's one of the questions that they do ask sellers. Are there any easements? That's supposed to be disclosed by the seller. And sometimes they don't even know that it exists, or they forgot.
And actually, the real estate agent has been in the business for a long time, 20, 25 years. And she said, "Good thing I'm experienced, because I did stop the settlement and I had them rewrite the contract, and they took $50,000 off the price of the house because of that conservation easement."
Wow. Yeah, there you go. So there you go. That's a way of advocating for your client. That's an agent that knows what they're talking about. And that's what our audience is. Our audience will know what's happening out there, so you can advocate for your clients as well. I did a house up in, I think it was in Frederick County, that had an agricultural easement. And as it turned out, the people were actually using it. They were renting out part of it for farmland. It was a really big issue for my buyers. They loved the property, but they weren't sure what they were going to do with that part, because they thought that they could build on it. Right. And as it turned out, they saw an opportunity for them to rent the land out too. So it actually was a little income for them to offset the cost of their home. So they actually kept it, and they actually enjoyed having that easement there.
Oh, that works out.
Yeah.
Okay, this is another case study, and this is in Whitehall, Maryland. This back house, as it was being built, this was a small builder. The builder said that there was not going to be any more houses. He said it was an agricultural easement, and it
Okay.
wasn't.
Oh,
So you got to make sure that if you get anything like that, some builders telling you there's an agricultural easement, you need to get these things in writing. So we also do elevation certificates. And I just mentioned this because it's for flood zone clients, and really the homeowners insurance people are the ones that help the clients order the elevation certificates. It helps determine your insurance rates. If you're in a flood zone, you need an updated elevation certificate. For instance, I have a friend that moved close to the water. She was in a major flood zone.
okay.
And as a matter of fact, when it rained, her unfinished basement got flooded every time because the water came up from the ground.
Ooh.
So what she had to do is put a lock on her basement door, sign a document so that she would never put furniture or occupy that basement. And the other thing that they had to do to get her insurance rates down is to move her air conditioning unit off 6 feet off the ground. So she has on a ledge on her chimney, 6 feet off the ground. So that brought her rates down after she got the elevation certificate.
Ah, okay. So it's funny when you talk about surveys, nobody even thinks about elevation certificates, unless, of course, you do live in a flood zone or you're along the coast. But it's interesting that this one is where the water was coming up from the ground. It's not even next to the water. So
Right.
this elevation certificate can be very useful. So make sure you check to see if you're in a flood zone. I know Maryland has flood zone maps, and you can look that stuff up and find out where the flood zones are. So, and if you do know that you're in a flood zone, offer this up to your client as an option. Hey, you may want to think about getting one of these elevation certificates because it can protect you, and they're not that expensive. So,
And this is our last case study. This is a first-time home buyer family with 3 small children. They wanted to be right on the water, but the real estate agent said, look at the side yard. The side yard has enough room to put a swing set or a little grilling area, because he was like, where are my kids going to play? But they worked out the side yard was going to be kind of the play area and the grill area, so they can all have some entertainment space. Now, location drawings are not required, but they wound up getting a location drawing. And at the table, they were presented with a drawing, and the side yard was only 6 feet.
it was only
It
60. How
wasn't
long
the
did how
25
big
feet
did they
that they
think it
thought.
was?
They thought it was at least 20 feet.
They thought it was 20 feet, but they only had a 6-foot little chunk of land when they thought they had a 20-foot chunk of land.
Yes. So
Wow.
they did not settle on the property, even though they had a moving truck ready to go. I understand that they settled a couple weeks later, and they did get a price off the house. They still
Okay.
bought the house, but the problem is if you didn't get a house location drawing, he would have built everything on the side yard there
Oh, yeah.
that he thought was his.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Been encroaching on someone else's property. And so here we are talking about whether you're going to buy a property that someone else has encroached on, but here you're going to be the one doing the encroaching without the survey. So we don't want to be in that boat, put our clients at risk for that. It does remind me, it's funny you said that. I actually had that same scenario happen to me on a deal. I was working again in Frederick County, and it had a huge lot next to it. It was probably like 30 feet. And I was not very good at judging acreage at that point in my career because it was very early. And I was like, oh yeah, that's part of the property. And then at closing, they discovered that was actually part of a separate lot. And they were actually, oddly enough, they were happy enough with the property that they still purchased the property, and because they didn't know what they were going to do with that part of the property anyway. So they did buy it, but as a new agent, not knowing how to advise people on it was actually a very scary moment for me as an agent. At that point, I wasn't sure the deal was just going to fall apart and I was going to get a bad review and all kinds of things were happening. So it's really important that we understand where the boundary lines are, and don't speak if you don't know. If you don't know where the property line is, do not say, yeah, it goes over to here. Yes, it's that extra 20 feet that Patty was talking about. Yes, that other lot is part of the property. If you don't know and you don't have a survey and you don't have the facts, yeah, zip it. Don't say anything. Wait until you know. And if you know, feel free to say, or just say, hey, you may want to get a survey. We'll look at the plot and we'll look at those. We'll get all the information we can and try to decipher what that is. But the survey is the only real way to know where your property lines are.
Yeah, don't assume that the neighbor's fence is right. Did they get a permit? Did they just do it on their own?
Yeah.
Don't assume property lines. Even if there was a line of trees, it might not be right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Patty, thank you so much for joining us today. And any last minute things that you want to share with our audience?
Well, thank you, Doug. Don't forget to tell your buyers to get a house location drawing. You want to know what they're buying.
So thanks again.
Bye.